Well, good morning. I'm Dave Beckmann. I've been around since Emerson started. I remember designing the first fan back in the 1800s. Actually, I started my career in 1969, so many of the pictures that were there I can remember. The rotary dial telephone, all of the paper tape for computers. I can remember programming a DEC computer with paper tape, all of those things. And so I have been through the cycles, and I'm trying to think, what can we do with a world on fire? And I thought, what would it be like to write a manual, having gone through several of these cycles, about the worst case scenario survival? And like most of us today, I went to Amazon to see if somebody had written the book before me. And sure enough, I found out that someone has written these books called The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. And so as we face a situation like we have today, where this is a very interesting little picture here with oil prices falling, and you have various different stakeholders in the event here. We have our customers who are panicking. Right behind it are jobs that are disappearing, and CEOs that are wondering what's going to happen next. All the way on the end, still hoping that things are getting better, are shareholders, expecting their increased dividends and increased share prices. So what I thought is, we ought to have a book called The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. And sure enough, on Amazon, there's multiples of these books, and I ordered them. And they kind of help you through some of your worst case scenarios. For example, what do you do if you fall into quicksand? The answer's in the book. What do you do if you're in front of a herd of charging elephants? The answer's in the book. What do you do if you have a piece of meat stuck in your throat? What about an emergency tracheotomy? The answer's in the book. What about if you jump out of a plane and your parachute doesn't open? The answer isn't in the book. So how do we survive this worst case scenario survival? So I'm just going to give you a little example here. What if you're out there on the savannah, there's no trees, and you see this herd of charging elephants coming at you? What should you do? Well, the book says, lay down and pretend that you're a log. Because elephants will come and they are sure-footed, so they will step over you. But the book says, make sure that you cover your face, because elephants are curious, and they will rub you over with their trunk, and it's rather abrasive. And you can't move, because as soon as you move, the elephant will realize you are not a log. And that then could get rather ugly. So that's the worst case scenario for what to do if you are in front of a herd of charging elephants. Now, I come from America, and down in Florida, where I have purchased my retirement home, we have an influx of snakes, and they are a particular kind called the anaconda. They are not native to the Everglades. They were brought in by people who had pets, and they didn't want to euthanize them, so they let them go in the Everglades. Without enemies, they are getting rather prolific and big, and so they can now swallow whole men. So in the book, there is a description of what to do if you meet up with an anaconda. The first thing you are to do is, again, lie perfectly still. Just rigidly still. The snake will circle you. It will begin to ingest you feet first. What you are to do is to slip your hand into your pocket very carefully, pull out your trusty Boy Scout knife. You do have that, right? Open it up, and then as the snake gets up to about here, don't panic. Insert the blade in the edge of the snake's mouth and rip. It will sever the muscle and you can escape. Don't panic. All right, so now that you know the drill, it's time for a quiz. We'll see how much you learned this week. What if you are being stalked by a mountain lion? I will be taking a poll here. We'll see how many of you learned anything this week. A, run. How many think we should run? Not too many. Play dead. Like, okay, about a third. Open your coat. About a third. Sing a happy song. Yeah, some people were singing last night. Okay. The answer, of course, is open your coat. Why? You look bigger. Sure. All right. Now we'll see how you're doing, and this is for HR. What will happen if you have a child with you and you are now stalked by a mountain lion? A, pick up the child. How many for that? About 4. Shield the child with your body. So put the child behind you. About 3. Shield your body with the child. Boy, we have some work to do here. D, run. All right, the answer is what? B, shield the, no, actually, it's pick up the child, A, because you look bigger, yes. All right, that's enough of that. So we have these books, the worst case scenario, survival handbook, and boy, do we need it. In addition to the troubles in our own industry, we are dealing with troubles in the society around us. I know that there was a big decision about whether or not to have this meeting. The board met, and fortunately they voted yes, because it's been a great meeting. But it's been a challenge, because on the top of the terrorism event, now we have the police on strike, then we have the truckers on strike blocking the motorways, and then we have the air traffic controllers on strike. This is a worst case scenario. We need a survival handbook. And we need one in our industry too. A few weeks ago, Mike Train invited me to go to a conference called Zero Week. Zero Week is an event that happens every year, and it is led by Dan Yergin and the IHS research analysts. And what they have done is over the year, they look at what is happening in the energy industry. And so for a period of days, we have one lecture after another from the top elite people in our industry. CEOs from major companies, Department of Energy people, all across the world. We had the president of Mexico there, the president of Rwanda, the secretary of energy, all spoke to us. Basically, I took away 3 points. A, perhaps little price increase for oil in 2016. Since we get most of our business from that, that's a little concerning. Secondly, by mid-17, there might be a little bit of an increase, and gas will be low forever. So that's a little challenging. And there were quite a number of great speakers there. And so I just listed some of them. I was quite interested. Of course, I'll put a plug in for Jim Nyquist, who painted a wonderful picture of the fact that, guess what? The worst case scenario is addressed through engineers. We, if given enough time, we can actually address many of the problems that we're facing. And I heard similar things from others. One highlight of it was Jay Straubel. You probably don't know him, but he is the chief engineer for Tesla. And he told us not only about the cars, but about the Gigafactory, and we saw that earlier this week. But the man I'd like to focus in on is Al-Nimi. He is the Minister of Energy in Saudi Arabia. He has been working longer than me. He has been in his current job for 70 years. And he has seen oil from $2 a barrel to $147 a barrel. And his lecture was so interesting, I thought it would be fun for us just to hear a snippet of it. Here he is.
Distinguished guests, good morning to all of you. I would like to thank Dan Yergin and Zero Week for inviting me to speak. It's great to be back in Texas, although Dan only invites me in a crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to set out why we as an industry have more that unites us than divides us. And I will highlight a challenge that confronts us all in coming years and decades. My remarks will cover three main areas: the international oil market, Saudi Arabia's oil policy in these challenging times, and the impact of climate change, which is very important.
So I took away from this in his half-hour lecture that OPEC is dead. There is no cooperation at this point, and the price will determine where oil is. That's what will determine production. So I came away from that thinking it can't be a political solution. It's going to have to be an engineering solution. And I think that sets up this conference well. It was opened by Steve Sonnenberg, who told us that we had a new reality and a new opportunity. And I took notes. And the first thing I noticed is Steve said, we live in an upside-down world. He told us that oil price is both a curse and a blessing. Actually, low oil price can help some. He then told us that only 15% of the companies that we deal with are in top quartile performance. And finally, he said 30% of operating cost is energy. So we can make improvements in all of these areas. His presentation was followed by Roldo Van Doren, who said that most of our projects are going woefully over budget and are not meeting expectation. So he said we just can't do things in the same old way. We have to find new ways of doing our projects. We then moved into a wonderful speech by Jack Aldrich, who said there's a new day coming. He told us of future opportunities, grand things that are on the horizon. He told us about the books that he has written and gave us some hope for the future. And perhaps you got in on the presentation by Professor Jean Rotmans, who said that we are not just living in an era of change, but we are in a change of eras. So I believe more than ever we need a worst-case scenario survival handbook, because I feel kind of like the old person that's in the house that says, I've fallen and I can't get up, because that's kind of where we are with this oil. But I think we have not only a new reality, I think the name of this conference, the theme of this conference is spot on. There's a new opportunity. This new reality actually gives us a new opportunity. So let me paint the picture of the worst case scenario, and then try at the end of my presentation to show you how you can thrive and excel in this difficult time for this new opportunity. The first thing I'd like to point out is where oil is today. As bad as it's been back in January at $27, yesterday it hit 44. It's beginning to get to a point where we can start to make money again, many of our companies. So the fall in oil price has fostered a wave of productivity gains, the likes of which our industry hasn't seen in several decades. We got lazy. We got complacent in the fact that we could make money at $100 oil. Many countries continue, as you can see by this chart, to be able to make money even in these depressed conditions because their lift cost is rather low. So the volatility of the price, though, limits investment, and so I'll show you in a second how disastrous that has been. Even though companies can make money or countries can make money, many of the social costs add to that, and most countries can't survive with $44 oil. Indeed, Iran, for example, needs oil to be over $100 a barrel in order for them to meet their social costs. What does this mean? What that means is that, say, Iraq or Saudi Arabia is going to be pumping as fast as they can, because if their lift cost is in single digits and their social cost is if oil was at $100 a barrel, they have to pump more in order to cover their social cost. This keeps the price low. Then, of course, having been in Saudi this year and in Kuwait this year, I noticed that there is a non-military war going on. Saudi Arabia is not very fond of Iran. And so if they can keep the price down, you can see Iran needs it at over $100 a barrel. That keeps them from being able to build their economy. So there's a lot of dynamics going on. It certainly is the worst case scenario. In addition to this, we have a lot of emphasis on moving ourselves away from the petro economy. And so there are efficiencies for both automobiles and homes and business that are actually making a huge impact. We are now generating with alternative energy sources that are replenished by the sun, by wind, by currents, whatever. And so you can see on this chart, for example, that as we progress, our energy needs are going to be lessened. However, the bottom line here shows that in total, we continue to need more and more energy. Even though we are becoming more efficient, we still need more energy. We still need to find more oil. And so, as we have a bit of a glut now, we're putting it into storage. And storage is full, completely full. And so what that means is that the oil price is rather volatile. If you've got no place to put it, including ships that are floating, then you sell it for whatever you can get for it. And so what that causes is a spiraling of even lower prices. And that's a bit of a conundrum we live in. But I'm interested in the fact that more and more we are beginning to get ourselves into a hole. The CapEx spending on this chart from the BBC shows a rather startling conclusion, and we're feeling it. Wood Mackenzie, for example, says that 68 major projects have been pulled back, put on hold, or canceled. That next number is staggering. Between the 2016 and 2020, $170 billion worth of projects have been canceled, put on hold, or they're indefinitely in question. So that is a big concern, and the bottom one affects us all. Over 500,000 jobs have been eliminated in our industry in just the past year. So, and that's continuing as we stop all the investments. And that's a concerning thing. That to me is a worst case scenario. And the fallout, of course, is companies are failing. And they're failing fast. When we were at CERAWeek, we heard that a third to a half of exploration and production companies are going to close this year. That's a lot. And so there's no guarantee that if you've been in business for 100 years, you'll stay in business. Indeed, of the companies of the first Fortune 500 list in 1955, 88% don't exist anymore. So just because you've been in business a long time doesn't guarantee you to be in business forever. How can we survive in such a worst case scenario? I think there's a fine line here that we're walking. As we decrease the number of projects, we cancel projects, we are not building our reserves for the future. And we are walking a fine line. We need today about 90 million barrels of oil a day. We consume about 88 or only 2 million barrels, and some say 1.5 million barrels between what we consume and what we produce. It's a very fine line. So from CERAWeek, one of the research analysts from MIT highlighted this, and I captured that video. I'll show you.
One thing to remember about oil prices today is if you look at capacity utilization, global production capacity utilization, we're at about 97, perhaps even 98%. And just in a typical market, that would seem to indicate upward pressure on prices. Now, since we're at 97, 98%, that means supply is well above demand right now. But over time, as we shift from glut to deficit, and that will happen, we have a little too much oil right now. When we have a little too little oil, we could see prices swing upward by perhaps in a very volatile fashion and perhaps stronger than some expect, at least for a time.
That's very concerning to me. We are right on the edge. So I thought to myself, wow, we are not investing in the future. We are right on the edge. What would it take to drive this thing wild? And then I'm listening to the news, and I find out that of the 2 million excess barrels that we have per day, there's 800,000 barrels that are missing. We don't know how to count. So that line may be much thinner than we thought. I'll play you that video.
While oil prices are making a bit of a rebound this week, they continue to linger in record low territory due to oversupply in the market. But just how big is the glut? Wall Street Journal reports that as many as 800,000 barrels of oil a day are unaccounted for. Here to discuss the mystery of the missing oil is Wall Street Journal reporter Georgie Konchev from our London bureau. Good to see you, Georgie.
Good to see you too.
So how do 800,000 barrels of oil go just completely missing? Isn't that watched for? Isn't that monitored very closely?
Yes, it is monitored pretty closely. The International Energy Agency, which is a top global monitor, is looking at supply and demand. But this data is based on estimates. So, for example, last year, it estimated that on a daily basis, there's 2 million barrels a day more supply than there's demand for. Now, out of these 2 million, roughly 2 million, about 1.1 million barrels a day are accounted for. These are in storage or in transit, in pipelines. And at least about 800,000, which we don't know where they are.
So 800,000, we don't know where they are. That's every day. And so I'm thinking, whoa, how does that happen? It appears, and if I continued the video, you would hear it, we don't know how to count. So that line may be razor thin. We may be on the cusp of a shortage. And because we haven't been investing, that's a worst case scenario. You can see by this chart that the drilling rigs have been dropping precipitously. In fact, there's been a 90% drop in drilling activity over the past year. Because when you have $100 oil, everybody makes money. But when you have $44 barrel oil, only a select few can make money. And so we are at a worst case scenario with, I'm sure, demand coming, but no ability to produce. And that's why we're here. We're here to take that worst case scenario and make a new opportunity out of it. And so I'd like to show you as we progress that people are beginning to work this. In the Middle East, they're beginning to see this, and drilling activity is actually going up. So as I talk to Dave Tredenik, I say, how bad is it? He says, not all that bad, because we're seeing Kuwait, Saudi, and UAE beginning to drill again, because they realize this is coming and they're seeing it ahead. The other challenge we have, of course, is what happened in Paris last year with COP21. This has completely turned our industry on its ear. Instead of an oil-based economy, now we want to have a green economy. And so more emphasis is placed on alternative energy, more demands on us. When I look at that, I think to myself, coal is being phased out. Yesterday, for example, Peabody Coal Company, one of the largest, in fact, the largest coal company, filed for bankruptcy. The president of Massey Energy is in jail as I speak. So coal is being phased out. After Fukushima, nuclear is being phased out. And so what is left is gas, combined cycle gas units. And we're building them as fast as we can. But you have to understand that just a couple of years ago, combined cycle units were used as what's called peakers. We only used them when we had high demand. Then we fell back to coal and we fell back to nuclear for our base load. But we've completely turned this around now to where now the combined cycle units are the base load. What then is the missing link that is going to have the real bottleneck? It's pipelines. Because instead of we're having just using the peaker for a high summer or a very cold winter, we now have to supply gas as a base load. I was talking to Bob Yeager, who is the president of our Power and Water Solutions group out of Pittsburgh, and he said, you have no idea how big a problem this is. Last year we went through what was called, year before last, we went through what's called the polar vortex. I don't know if Europe suffered from that quite like we did. I remember days in Marshalltown where it was 17 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit for several days in a row. Because homeowners are priority 1, power companies fall to priority 2 or 3 because after all they were just supposed to be peakers. But now they are base load, and we were shutting down generation plants because of no gas. So we're going to have an opportunity in the future to try and build pipelines in a big way. So we see opportunity and we see challenges. It's kind of, as I showed at the beginning, this roller coaster. Some people on the roller coaster are going to be thrilled, and some people are going to be terrified. And so I got a little video that shows exactly that. Here's a dad and his daughter riding a roller coaster. Notice the difference between their emotions.
It's like a nightmare of swinging at a kid. Hold on, Dad.
Which seat are you in this morning? Are you the dad or are you the little girl? It depends where you are. If you're in the power industry, you're the little girl. If you're upstream oil and gas, you're the dad. And so we have a worst case scenario, but we also have a great opportunity. And so as I think about this, I'm a philosopher, and I came across this poem many years ago, and it came back to mind as I was putting the presentation together. Thomas Bailey Aldrich says this: in youth beside the lonely sea, voices and visions came to me. When I was first starting my career, the horizon just looked like a pot of gold. All the opportunities were there. They followed me from street to street, the dreams that made my boyhood sweet. But now I've gotten older. I've been through a couple of these cycles. And Aldrich goes on, now one by one, the visions fly. And one by one, the voices die. More distant, the accents ring. More frequent, the receding wing. And then the reason I chose this poem, full dark shall be the days in store when voice and vision comes no more. If you've gotten to the point in your career where all you see is the bad, all you see is the worst case scenario, you are in the last stanza of that poem. Full dark shall be the days in store when voice and vision come no more. And so what I want to do for us today is I want us to develop a voice and a vision. Because I think in order to succeed, in order to get that new opportunity, we need to find our voice and we need to live our vision. So that those dark days won't be there, we need to move back up to the top of our poem. To do this, I'm going to use an illustration from a book I read by a guy named Rich Karlgaard. I picked this book up, and I do a lot of reading now that I'm retired, and picked this up. Rich Karlgaard is the managing editor of Forbes magazine, so he sees a lot of things. And Rich said every business has three sides to it. He says there's the hard edge and a strategic base and a soft edge. The hard edge is those pieces of your business that Emerson in particular is very good at. We are very good at operations. We are very good at project management. We have been working on project management for many years now. We probably have, and you do too, and you're partnering with us, some of the best engineers in the business. We produce great products, and that's important. And then to support that, you have a strategic base. Every company needs a good administration, a group of people that can help raise capital on the open market in order to be able to build those products. It also has to have a marketing group that advertises the products. But what Karlgaard says is that that is not enough to succeed. You must have a soft edge. And in these trying times, this is the survival handbook that will get you through the worst case scenario. Because every company that's alive today has a good product. Most have good operations. Most have good project management. So let's look at what's there. It's the voice. It's what gives you your image to the business, to the environment around you, to your customers. It looks kind of like this. There are a number of elements. It's trust, smarts, teams, taste, and story. And I'll go through each one of these and then I'm done. So in order to get you into this, I need to kind of give you a little quiz, get you kind of going again. And so I'm going to give you some hints. And I want you to kind of voice back. It's okay, you can talk in this room. I want you to voice back what is the name of the company. And each hint will give you a little bit more about the company. The first one is the blank company has been turning creative ideas into breakthroughs for well over a century. All that clue tells you is that this company is over 100 years old. So put that in your mind, because most people will give me names that are less than that old. 2, they invented grammar checkers. IBM, good guess, but wrong. They invented the electronic dictionary in 1985. Wang? Did I hear Wang? Good guess. Not right. Who else? Xerox. I heard Xerox. Close. Not correct. They invented the laptop word processor in 1989. By this time, somebody will say Microsoft. But they aren't 100 years old. Motorola, good guess. Not right. Here's another one. They invented PDAs in 1994. Anybody still have a Palm Pilot? 2 people. Yeah, okay. Well, your company's a little slow to get on board. All right. I have an IT department like that too. All right. Let's go on. What's the answer? Hewlett-Packard. I haven't heard the answer yet. It is Smith Corona. I went to their website they've pulled it down now because they're out of business. But before they went out of business, I went to their website, and this is what I saw. On the 8th day, God created Smith Corona. Is that arrogance or what? There's only one person that has more arrogance than that, and he's running for president in the United States. We have this wonderful choice in the United States. We can either choose pride or deceit. Two venial sins. Isn't this wonderful? All right, so on the 8th day, God created Smith Corona. That arrogance is incredible. But you know, this company has a storied history. Back in the 1800s, they invented this double-barrel shotgun, and then by 1942, they had the tallest building in Seattle. Then they invented all these printers, but by 2000, they were out of business. How does a company fail that dramatically? They have a storied history. The first machine to use both upper and lower case. They had an adding machine, electric typewriter, ribbon cartridge. This is getting into my era. And I remember in college using that ribbon instead of feeding the spools around. And then a real breakthrough, different fonts. You could put a different daisy wheel in there and get different fonts. Also, in 1989, they invented a laptop word processor. You'll see a little window up there. What you would do is type the line, and if you liked it, you could say print. And that kept you from having to erase on that erasable bond paper. In 1990, they had formed an alliance with a computer company called Acer. It didn't last long. In 92, they formed an alliance with Microsoft for a grammar checker, but by 2012, the only thing left is a thermal printer. Now, what happened? Back in 89, they looked at their net worth, and it was about $500 million on the exchange. And they said, if any of these startups ever amount to anything, we'll buy them outright. And they looked at Commodore. Anybody had a Commodore? Wasn't that great? Oh, you guys are Europeans. If I asked that in the United States, nobody had one. I was an Amiga guy. And I had a 2000, a 1000. Those were cool. And then, of course, Osborne. Did anybody have an Osborne? You had an Osborne. Oh, was it cool or what? This was called the luggable. And you could put it in the overhead compartment on the airplane. And then, of course, that little company nobody ever heard of, Apple. And they said we could just buy them. The one thing they didn't want to do was to follow their competitor, Remington. Because Remington decided to get into the computer industry, and they bought this big computer thing back then, and that's how big they were, and they declared bankruptcy in 81. So Smith Corona didn't want to do that, so they stayed away from that whole business, and of course they're dead. But the interesting thing to me is how out of touch management was. Here is their CEO, G. Lee Thompson. If you want to be sophisticated, don't use your first name, use your middle. It just sounds better. So G. Lee Thompson said this: many people believe that the typewriter and word processing business is like a buggy whip industry, which is far from true. There's still a strong market for our products in the United States and the rest of the world. He said that in 92. In 95, he was bankrupt. How out of touch can you be? And so when we get into this business, we are in a similar situation. One company after another is following the same path as Smith Corona. They've made way too many expenditures, and they are going broke at an enormous rate. The ones that aren't are laying off tens of thousands of workers. This is a worst case scenario. Big companies can be taken over. The Economist said perhaps even BP. That's just a guess by some analysts, but it could happen. Stranger things have happened. So now we need to see how we can take this worst case scenario and write a survival handbook to prosper. How do we do this? Well, I have to go back to the days when Raul and I were young, 1857. And this Major John Sedgwick had just graduated from our prestigious military institute, West Point, and he's been given his first command. He's out on the plains of Kansas. He's riding with his new brigade, and he's sitting here, and all of a sudden, he starts to hear something, and he sees this cloud coming up over the horizon. Now, he's been to West Point. He knows all of the strategies of battle. And as he's getting ready, he says, "Whoo, that must be some big Indian thing. It looks like Custer has come back again." So he realizes just at the last moment that it's not Indians, it's buffalo. As far as east is from west, there's this herd of charging buffalo. There was never a course in West Point about charging buffaloes. What was he to do? He had no idea. A little buck private comes up to him and says, "Major, I know you don't usually take suggestions, but I have one. And we will survive if you follow my recommendation, because I grew up out here. We need a triangle. And what we'll do is we'll form a triangle. We'll put gunners all along the triangle, and all of them point towards the buffalo at the front. And we just keep firing. Before long, there will be a pile of buffaloes, and the whole herd will split around us. We'll take our wagons and horses and put it in the middle." You see, what I'm pointing out here is there's a power in a triangle. Triangles are powerful. In order for us to succeed, we need this triangle on all the sides. We need trust, smarts, teams, taste, and story. Let's go into that, because that's our voice. The first thing I want to point out to you is trust. It's in a crisis. Studies have shown that only 1 in 5 employees are engaged, heart and mind, in their business. I remember talking to Terry Busby, and we were hosting somebody into Marshalltown, and they said, "How many employees do you have here and that are working here?" And Terry said, "About half." So he was right. Only about half of the people are really working. They've lost their heart and soul. And of course, he was making a joke. But it's true. Most companies, in fact, Fortune magazine said that 42% of the companies, the workers are not engaged at all. And it's because of lack of trust. More than a third of the companies are so dysfunctional, the article said, that the best people don't really care about what they're doing, and the worst people don't know that they don't care. They don't care that they're doing a lousy job. So this all goes back, I think, over 100 years ago to a guy named Frederick Winslow Taylor. He is this guy that invented the modern business cycle. He's the guy that invented the way we structure our companies from the pyramid top down. And he had a message to the Congressional Committee. He says, "I can say without the slightest hesitation that the science of handling pig iron," that's the raw iron, "is so great that the man who is physically able to handle it is so sufficiently stupid as to comprehend the handling of it." And what he basically did is divide the business into the thinkers and the doers. In the old days, we had apprentice, and the apprentice learned from the master. They were both the thinker and the doer. After Winslow Taylor, we had the thinkers and the doers. And that's our problem today, is that we have this class structure. We're in a new day. Steve Sonnenberg said the world is upside down. We need to go back to thinking and doing. And that's what Peter Drucker said. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. I need to leave that slide up there for a second because I need you to study that. It's almost a twist on words. Management is doing things right. That means that management raises the capital. They set in place the HR. They set in place your modus operandi. But leadership, that's you, says, wait a minute, you're not doing the right things. Let me show that a little differently. Here's management up there on the top. There's the management team. They are slated to do things right. unless they are equally opposed by an engineering team that says, oh, wait a minute, you have to do the right things, the company will break. If this gets too heavy, you won't be competitive because your product will be too expensive. If that's too heavy, you'll be competitive, but you'll go out of business. So, because they don't have the balance. And this gets kind of violent sometimes. There's yelling and screaming, but then you go to dinner. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to have arguments with the boss. So, into that, we insert a partner. Because I think trying to do it all in-house anymore doesn't work. And that's what this conference is all about, is that we are sharing one with another, sharing ideas from one company to another, sharing ideas from Emerson. And when you do, you hit that sweet spot. We have a unique challenge because some of these people are now missing. They're my age and we're playing golf. And so we have Emerson plus our partners. If you are in the demonstration area, and I recommend you go before it closes, look at our partners. These two will enable that balance to happen. All right, so we're going to develop this winning way very quickly now. Trust. Trust is the confidence in a person or group when there's risk and uncertainty, and boy, do we have that today. It's the lubrication that makes the organization work. It has two dimensions to it. Two dimensions. One, it's internal employees, and two, it's external customers. I tire of this idea that shareholders come first, then customers, then employees. If that's the modus operandi for your company, you will be a Smith Corona. Every company that succeeds takes care of their employees first. There are books now published, I've read this one, the customer comes second. If we take care of our teams internally, if we take care of our own people first, then customers will come flocking to our door. It becomes so attractive they can't stay away. I've made it a policy of mine is to only invest in companies that make the top 100 list on Fortune for best places to work. Because I'm not the best analyst in the world, but I find out that over time, those companies that make that top 100 list perform better than any other company. And my shares have allowed me to retire 10 years ago. All right. Secondly is smarts. Smarts we think of as going to INSEAD or going to Cambridge or Oxford. It's not. Smarts, I like to say I graduated from the school of hard knocks, where the school colors were black and blue and the school yell was ouch. Because that is what makes a person smart. In fact, a study was done at Northwestern Mutual Life where they said that the salespeople that made the most calls were the most successful. And that's kind of a duh. Like, yeah, of course. But it went deeper than that. They said the more frequently the door was slammed in their face, the better they became. Because we learn something from mistakes. And so good companies celebrate mistakes. They celebrate the fact that you tried to move beyond the box. Too many of us punish mistakes. The best companies celebrate them, and that develops smarts. The next one is teams. From the Neanderthal times, we realize that we have to work in teams together. And we're good at teams, but we make our teams too big. Jeff Bezos from Amazon says, you never let a team get bigger than what he calls the 2-pizza rule. If the team is bigger than 2 pizzas can feed for lunch, it's too big. You'll have way too many inputs. Everybody has a thought, and pretty soon it just stagnates. So never let your team get too big. What about the makeup of that team? It has to have diversity, but not ethnic diversity, cognitive diversity. You need to have the guy in your staff that's got Bubba on his blue shirt. He's got to be there. You also have to have the research person. But cognitive diversity is important. Passion. If there's anybody on your team that's a naysayer, they're like Eeyore in the Golden Acre, 100 Acre Wood. Get them off the team because they will kill the enthusiasm. Teams need passion. And finally, you got to have true grit. You got to have the idea that I'm an overcomer. In spite of all the obstacles, you got to keep pushing. You got to say, my career rests on this. I remember as a young salesman, I went in and the guy told me he was going to give the job to my competition, and I just kind of fell apart. He says, what's wrong? I said, this is my career. I got a family I'm trying to feed. I got a baby on the way. He says, it isn't that bad. I said, it is that bad. He says, okay, I'll give you this one. You got to show passion. Innovation is not turning money into ideas. It's turning ideas into money. Show your passion. Next is taste. I think we forget this. When I was here living in Germany when the wall came down, and I remember the Trabis coming across. Anybody remember the Trabis? And driving on the Nuremberg Autobahn in my Mercedes at 180 clicks, right in front of me over the crest of the hill is a little Trabi doing 50. And you'd see these long black marks on the Autobahn. Fortunately, we got them off, but there was no taste there. Taste will sell cars. Taste will sell your product. You have to make it look good. Coca-Cola found this out. They came out with this diet drink called Tab. Did they have that in Europe? Well, in the United States, we had this thing called Tab, and they painted the can pink. So I want to ask you, if you are at a football game and you're with your blokes from Man United, Travis, you're not Man United, are you? Yeah, all right. And what do they say when you open a pink can of diet soda? Well, obviously it didn't go, so then they tried to go neutral with Diet Coke, and they kind of picked up a little, but now they're marketing strictly to men with Coke Zero. And so when we watch the Super Bowl, they got a bunch of blokes sitting around a fire pit, and they're drinking Coke Zero. So they have marketed to each one. You have to have a true understanding of who your customer is when you market your product. Finally, you have to make it look good. Because if you make it look good, over here you put some beauty into it, people actually will pay more for it. Why do people buy an iPhone when you could buy a Samsung for less? It just looks nicer. Sorry, Duncan. Story, and I'm done. The most important thing is to be able to tell your message. And it's completely different. Steve Sonneberg, I put it up in the first slide, said the world is upside down, and boy is it ever. The way we used to sell is we used to do data dumps. We used to just tell all the features, functions, and benefits of our product. But that's over. People have all the information they need in their pocket. And so it's over. You can't sell based on facts and figures anymore. There are 3 ways to communicate, I think. One is to teach your solution to people. That's the old way. I know the solution, and I'm going to teach you. The second way is to teach people your solution. What's the difference? The difference between A and B is I know the solution, and I'm telling you. The second one is I know you, and I'm catering my solution for you. The third one is even better. Let's see if we can find a solution together. That's what this conference is all about. As I mentioned, data dumps kill presentations. You can see by what's going on there is no attention to what's being said. And I've seen a number of presentations this week that fall into this category. As engineers, we're still there. We still think we just have to dump data on you. And so I'm going to give you two examples. Which one do you think is more effective? Here's Bill Gates over here with his slide, and here's Steve Jobs with his. Which one appeals to you more? Well, make it simple. because that nobody remembers. And that's two literal presentations, both successful. There is something about story that's so compelling. It's just endemic to us, especially in the Indian culture with the Vedas and so forth. But it's throughout all of our culture. So I'm going to share with you a little story. It's January of 2010. There's been an earthquake in Haiti, and it's a horrible thing. About 150,000 people died. Over 500,000 people were severely injured. There was a doctor, and his name was Dr. Richard McLaughlin. He was very wealthy because he was a gastroenterologist, and he had an airplane. But he had a very, very special airplane. It's called a Cirrus 22. I don't know if I have any pilots in the room. Is anybody a pilot? One. Do you know what a Cirrus 22 is? What's unique about that airplane? It has what? Oh, you're a glider pilot. You don't have you're a green guy. Okay. All right. There's something unique about this airplane, and the fact that it's very expensive. It has a parachute, not for the person, but for the plane. And Dr. McLaughlin's in this plane with a parachute. And so he's making 90 trips back and forth from Miami down to Haiti, carrying medical supplies. And on his 90th trip, he's with his daughter. The oil pressure falls, and he is without an engine over the Bermuda Triangle. And so it's got a parachute. And it just so happens that there was a Coast Guard cutter just below it, and it caught it on film. Here it is.
A rare sight caught on camera as a single-engine plane came to a rest in the ocean after being lowered from the sky by a parachute. Pilot ran out of fuel off the coast of Maui. Coast Guard recorded this video. The plane's manufacturer is Cirrus, and among private pilots, they're known as a high-performance, high-price tag aircraft. But this SR-22 model does have a built-in parachute, which we can thank in this case for the pilot being able to climb out of the cockpit in one piece. He was picked up by a passing Holland America cruise ship.
Now, the only people that will get this is Americans. Brian Williams was in the back seat. He's no longer a newscaster because he claimed that he was on helicopters in the Gulf War, and he wasn't. Anyway, the reason I tell you this story is it's a memorable story. You'll remember it, and it emphasizes the point that I was making about the management and the engineering team. Because Cirrus, the plane manufacturer, never wanted anybody to pull the handle because it would make their planes look like they were not reliable. The Pilots Association said, you've got to pull the handle, otherwise you crash. And so the two of them got together, and actually now the advertising campaign is working. The handle is the main feature of the airplane. Okay, so when you're putting this story together, make sure that it goes like this. Life is in balance. We have $100 oil. Then we have a conflict, a worst case scenario, survive, a worst case scenario. Then we balance, restored. And to do this, you're not going to use facts and figures anymore. You're going to tell a story with emotion. So we're coming to the end. There's one more piece I need to tell you. And I do this tongue-in-cheek. But there's going to come a time in your life, in all of our lives, when everything falls apart. There's going to come a time when something bad happens to you, and you have three choices. You can let it define you, destroy you, or strengthen you. And you better have something deep down inside that you can use as a resource. This could be a divorce. It could be a health situation. It could be the death of a child. You've got to have something, and I call that faith. I'm not going to define it anymore, but all of us need it. I pick up this picture of my hero, Steve Jobs, in his last days, being held up by somebody. Steve had to dig deep. For all his career, it was all about Apple. But there comes a time when your worst case scenario is not just working harder at your career. And so I recommend today for each of you that you develop something stronger than that. Reach into your family. Spend time on the weekends with those you love. Spend time in contemplation, because there's going to come a time when you need that. That's the worst case scenario. That happened to Aubrey McClendon. He was the top of his game. And just several weeks ago, he was on his way to a hearing where it appeared that he wasn't going to be able to make bail. At one time, he was a billionaire, and he lost it all. He's the chairman of Chesapeake Energy. He accelerated his car to 88 miles an hour and crashed into that bridge on purpose. Took his life because there wasn't anything left other than career. You got to have something more than that.
Thank you very much.
Play this video because I'm running out of time. In Iowa, where I live, I love to see the tractors being restored. And when they're done, I go to these tractor fairs by Marshalltown, and I get the same thing from every single guy who's restored a tractor. They love to hear you say, "Well done." We all want that. And I'm just going to take a second here. We are in an industry that is maligned. People think we're in the dirty industry. There is no industry, none, that has elevated life on this planet more than ours. We produce power. We produce health. We produce drugs that keep people alive. Every year we take 500,000 more people and put them on the grid. We stop having them cook their meals on a charcoal stove. They are now using electricity. They're getting educated. Hospitals form. No industry has done more to better the lifestyle on this planet than ours. You can be proud of what you do. You can hear, "Job well done." I'm sorry for that little bit of preaching, but I believe that. Peter told us that when you see it, then you got to decide, and then you got to act. And that's what I'm asking you today. Because Steve told us that we need to move into the top quartile. Most of us are below. In fact, only 15% are there. He told us to get from the small r to the big R. He also told us that we should improve the bottom line through project certainty. And finally, what I heard him say was, have fun already, because you're doing something significant. And when you do, you will be able to write the worst case scenario survival handbook, and you'll turn the new reality into an opportunity that will succeed. Thank you very much.